So we have Susie Ciolin. She has over 30 years experience with the Technical Standards and Safety Authority, the majority of which have been in public education and communications. Her experience spans public education, community and stakeholder engagement and relations, including partnership opportunities, corporate and strategic communications, and issues management. In her current role as communications program manager, Susie continues to lead all public education safety initiatives, including what we're here for today, CO safety. For nearly 20 years, Susie, alongside Dave Lyle, have led the successful design, implementation, and execution of countless CO campaigns across the province, associated research and campaign measurement initiatives and partnership opportunities. So welcome, Susie. And then we also have Dave Lyle with us. Dave has over 40 years experience leading the design, implementation, and evaluation of public education and other stakeholder engagement strategies. His experience spans the not-for-profit, public, and private sectors with more than 25 years of progressive management responsibilities up to and including the executive level. Dave's career has focused on a wide range of public and life safety issues. Dave's extensive experience includes areas such as public education, risk communication, crisis communications, behavioral research, and behavior change strategies, social marketing, and community/media relations. Dave served as a director on the Ontario Fire Marshal's Public Fire Safety Council Board and was an active member of the council itself for more than 10 years. In 2014, Dave was presented with the Ontario Fire Marshal's Award of Excellence in Fire and Life Safety. He has worked closely with many public safety organizations, including the Technical Standards and Safety Authority and numerous fire and emergency services departments/organizations across Ontario. So with that, I will hand it over and welcome Susie and Dave.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brianna, and good morning, everybody. And thanks for having Dave and I present to you today. We always have the opportunity to engage on a very regular basis with local fire services, as we are doing with the upcoming campaign of CO Awareness Week this November, and really appreciative of this opportunity to engage all you fire educators, appreciating the work you do to promote carbon monoxide, fire and life safety across the province. Today really is an opportunity for us just to share with you some information as it relates to our public engagement strategy. Pretty much as Brianna had mentioned, for the past 20 years, Dave and I have worked very, very closely, and actually my hat's off to Dave. He's the impetus behind all things public education and CO safety, as we now know it at TSSA. Once he retired from TSSA, we were smart enough to rope him back in, and he continues to work very closely with us in terms of our whole approach, our engagement strategy, and continuing to push out what is really a top priority for TSSA, carbon monoxide awareness and carbon monoxide safety as a whole. Okay, so we're going to do a bit of a dog and pony show today. We're going to volley off from a couple of slides from me over to Dave and so on and so on. And appreciating that Brianna had mentioned that if you have any questions, feel free to throw it into the chat forum. Feel free to do that as we're going through each of the sections. That way, you know, it's topical. If you want to ask a question, we can stop for a couple of minutes, address the questions as we're going through each of the sections. So today we're just basically going to, for the agenda of the day, we've done our introductions, and we're going to speak about our TSSA's public engagement approach, our whole look at behavior change, because really that is the essence of how we go about our engagement strategy. Ultimately, what we're looking at doing is changing people's behaviors when it comes to being carbon monoxide safe. We're going to talk specifically about our public engagement strategy, the initiatives we undertake, how we measure our campaigns at the end of the day, and then have a general Q&A and discussion session. So on that note, I'm just going to flip it over and we'll get Dave to start things rolling. Dave?
Great. Thanks, Susie, and thanks to everybody on the call and had the opportunity to to get involved, and we love to share our information. Susie said we've been working on this a long time, and my failure at retirement is reflected in the fact that I'm still here, but it's also my passion. Without sounding too Hallmark-like, this was my favorite part of the job when I was at TSSA and in other walks of life. So it's not really work; it's enjoyment, and I get to do what I want, and then I get to go to the cottage. So it works out pretty good. Anyway, jumping into the actual kind of presentation itself, as Susie mentioned, TSSA probably close to 2 decades ago decided to kind of take a step back and really want to understand how Ontarians think, how they perceive risk, because that's fundamental to understanding how you can engage them and change. So we really started at the beginning and tried to get a better idea on public risk perceptions, which is really how people make decisions. And by understanding that better, it informs your design and implementation of how you engage those folks, and how you can work with partners to have multiple voices out there. So really that was the main thrust, was to really go back to basics and do some homework to figure out how to do this best. Next one, Susie. So as Susie mentioned, behavioral research was really at the foundation of what we were doing. And the reason we're presenting this as part of this kind of workshop or presentation is this is applicable to any kind of situation where you're obviously hoping to get people to behave differently and be safer. So fundamentally, when we did this research, it wasn't just focused on carbon monoxide. It was based on people's perceptions of risks, how they make decisions around that, how and what influences that, and it changes. Life stage really plays a significant role how people may internalize and manage risks. And obviously things like, the community, where you live, who you are, some of the demographics are all also influential. And so overall, we learned a lot, and it was fundamental in changing, I would say revolutionizing, in a sense, the way we did our public education programs. Next one. So, what did we learn? And some of this people may say, well, isn't that kind of obvious? And yeah, maybe, but it's important sometimes to go back and validate. In other words, we can sit around, and we've all had a fair amount of experience doing the things that we do, but it's sometimes good to go back to the horse's mouth, so to speak, and make sure that what we think people think and how they act is really what happens. So, a lot of what's on this slide really just has been a case of validating, and in some cases learning new perceptions for us on how people react and how you might change their behaviors. What we did was we developed some qualitative and quantitative research to really try to understand, can we segment or kind of categorize Ontarians, knowing that one size doesn't fit all. And what we found was that there are 4 basic personality segments among Ontarians. And that is really crucial in terms of designing public education programs, because what you can do then is start to understand among those segments, what are the different drivers, because they are different. And that kind of research really was important. As you can see, the last bullet on this slide, the research provided us with tremendous insights about how people learn, what their preferred communication styles are, what their approaches are to using that information. Because what we learned was how to inform our strategies. And for example, in some cases, we may know our strategy is more effective with 2 out of those 4 segments. And that may be all right, so long as we have a complementary strategy that speaks more to the other segments, rather than trying to get information that's kind of more universal and kind of that one message fits all. We've moved away from that to understanding that we need to tailor our messaging. And some people might say, well, if you only reach 2 segments with that strategy or that campaign, aren't you leaving half the population out? And the answer to that is, well, no. We have another campaign, or we have another strategy that's going to work much better for those segments. So it's kind of really getting more strategic in how you design your programs in the first place. But you need to do that based on knowledge. And quite frankly, that didn't really exist. And we had to build it. And that's what we have now. And that's what's really at the foundation of our successful program. Next one, Susie. So just to give you, we could spend easily probably 2 or 3 hours just on our segmentation and our behavioral research. And obviously we don't have that today, but we wanted to just give you a flavor of what we've done. So what you see on this slide is the 4 segments, and these are just kind of arbitrary titles for these groups of Ontarians. And each one of them has a number of characteristics that we really much better understand now. For example, the safe group are you might consider them at one end of the risk spectrum. They're risk avoiders. They see risk as danger, versus the active group are at the other end of that spectrum. They embrace risk. They're the people who feel that they're maybe wrongly, but feel that risk is an opportunity potentially and not a threat. And then you've got groups in between. So we know the demographics of these groups, their ages, what their preferred engagement techniques are, who they trust more than others when they're seeking information, how they seek information. So you can appreciate it. Really gives us a lot of insights as to how they think, how they make decisions, and how you can best engage them to start to get them to move along that behavior change continuum towards adopting the safety behaviors. And as I say, all of this research is not just about carbon monoxide. It's about how people make decisions and managing risk and either changing, adopting, or avoiding behaviors that all of us that are in the safety business would like them to be more cognizant of. So that's kind of the foundation on which we've been able to build all of the TSSA's public education program, but most importantly, carbon monoxide.
Thanks, Dave. And just picking up on what Dave was saying in terms of all the research insights that we garnered and gained over the years, that really helped us, and we applied all that insight, and it helped us inform our messaging, our content, our tone moving forward in terms of our materials, how we were going to design our whole engagement with the community, and what we were going to say and how we were going to go about things, the strategies that we were going to apply when it came to executing our messages, our campaigns, etc. And then ultimately it informed how we were going to measure our campaigns, because that at the end of the day is important for us as well too. We want to know that what we're doing is making a difference. So at the end of the campaigns, we turn around and actually do performance measurement to find out how effective was the campaign. Is it making a difference when it comes to awareness and recall and ultimately behavior change, which is our ultimate goal, as mentioned earlier. So what have we learned? So much, as Dave had mentioned over the years. As Dave had pointed out, audiences, they're varied. Who are they? How do they make decisions? How and when do we engage them? What we learned in terms of messaging, we really have to approach it from a kind of multi-dimensional, two-prong approach. It's those individuals that kind of think from the heart, it's an emotional thing, and those that think from the head, it's a brain thing. And at the end of the day, we realize that when it comes to changing behavior, it's a marathon. It's a long road we're on. It's not a 100-meter sprint that we're on. And, we've made the organization recognize that at the end of the day, it's a long path, but it's an important path that we need to be on to get to where we want to get to in terms of changing people's behaviors. I mean, we all know as individuals and as educators, when you look at things like, seatbelt legislation or smoking cessation, it's not something that happens, from one day to the next. It takes time, but ultimately you should get to your end goal, and that is our end goal as well, is changing people's behaviors when it comes to carbon monoxide safety.
So turning to carbon monoxide specifically, so as we've talked so far, it's been this generic understanding of people's risk perceptions and risk decision making and what influences that. So once we have that foundation, we can now layer on a particular hazard or risk. And that's what we did. There was others as well, but TSSA's #1 risk priority is carbon monoxide when it comes to the fuel sector. So we were able then to start to delve into carbon monoxide specifically and look at both TSSA's statistical incident data, and then also start to look at how we're going to design programs. So as the slide says, the risk analysis identifies human behavior. In other words, end users as the important root cause of many cause of safety incidents involving fuels. And risk due to carbon monoxide is the leading contributor to the overall level of fuel safety risks in the province. So CO incidents, if you want to get down one more layer, where are they happening? Well, year after year, we see, virtually like 2/3 or maybe even more of CO incidents are occurring in people's residences. So essentially, somehow, the key factor in mitigating that is going to get, those residents, those homeowners to take action, because we know what the primary root causes are. And quite frankly, there's two, but the one is way, in other words, the first is much larger than the second. It really is dealing with proper ongoing maintenance of fuel-fired appliances. And obviously, there is a smaller percentage that's related to the use of fuel-fired equipment. So we know what the problem is, and it's consistent. What we also know is that CO incidents are, if you look at information, not just in Ontario or Canada or around the world, it's grossly underreported. So we know we have an issue, and what we also know is it's larger than what our numbers tell us, but it's large enough even with the statistics that TSSA has to rank it as a top priority.
And just to add to Dave's point, from TSSA's perspective, given that we don't have the jurisdictional authority to enter into people's residences unless specifically requested to do so by the homeowner or under warrant or for the purpose of an investigation, really at the end of the day, it boils down to using public education as our risk mitigation strategy in terms of educating homeowners when it comes to their responsibilities and CO safety.
Yeah, absolutely. So what did we find in terms of specific carbon monoxide research? It's another one of these cases where there wasn't anything that was absolutely 100% surprising, but there were some really important things that clarified for us in terms of messaging and some of those other things Susie talked about. What we found is overall, in terms of risk perceptions, generally the public is pretty aware of consequences. And maybe I should take a step back here and say, the fundamental risk equation is consequence times probability. So in other words, if you just use an arbitrary scale like 1 to 10, and 10 is the highest consequence and 10 is the highest probability, your risk is going to be 100. Versus if you think the consequence is 5 and the probability is 0, the equation is going to be, in a sense, from a risk perception, is, well, basically no risk. So the public kind of gets one part of that equation more or less right. It doesn't mean it isn't worth reminding them, but they get the other part really bad. In other words, the probability that it's going to happen, people just don't believe it happens. And that really leads to that second point. Self-assessment of their knowledge is way overstated. And a lot of the research we did, and we did focus groups across the province. I've probably been through 50 or 60 focus groups, probably more, talking to people about their perceptions of safety and risk and then about CO. They generally self-assess themselves like an 8 or 9 or 10 out of 10. Halfway through those research sessions, most of them have lowered their scores to like 4 because they start out with that idea that they're actually pretty knowledgeable. And that's a really important point for us because it's told us where we have to start. And I use the analogy always, it's kind of like boot camp. We first have to break down this perception that a lot of the public has, is that they don't need to know anything more because they already know everything. The problem is a lot of that knowledge is faulty. So you almost have to start at the point of, making sure in your public education programs that you're dealing with facts and information either from the heart or from the brain that starts to shake that resolve a little bit. So then they go, well, maybe I don't know. And if you get them to that point, you're starting to win the battle. The other major point here is that people view carbon monoxide risks as involuntary. That's kind of a fundamental part of risk awareness and risk management. If people accept that they're voluntarily, inducing a risk on themselves or houses or whatever, they're more likely to think, okay, I have some ownership of that. But if they feel that risk is being kind of thrust upon them or they have no choice, they tend to have a lower level of acceptance or responsibility for managing it. So a lot of the anecdotal and also quantitative information we learn from people is they go, well, this is Canada. What choice do I have? I have to have a furnace. So it should be made so it isn't risky. That's not my problem. They're not quite that blunt, but you get that impression. So as I said, or as we say in this slide, they really feel others own the risk and they should manage it. So they don't really accept that this is a shared responsibility or that their piece of that safety management risk mitigation pie is either very small or non-existent. And of course, as Susie mentioned a couple of minutes ago, that couldn't be further from the truth in the sense of from all sorts of perspectives and angles, we need them to be part of the answer. And it's very, very much the same for fire safety. So none of these things are just applicable to CO, but it tells us how people think and how we have to engage them and have to get that thinking to change. So very quickly, there's a lot of information here. I know we don't have scads of time this morning, but we really went down to the basics to understand, how do people understand CO? And as we said, there's a very low level of CO literacy. Some knowledge of the characteristics and the consequences. So a lot of people will tell you, oh yeah, you can't smell it, you can't see it. And it's if it ever really happened, it is poison, it is dangerous. But here's where the real challenge comes. It's the probability of an event that they're totally kind of unaware of and don't really understand and greatly underestimate it. And part of that is because of sources. You talk to most people and they might say, well, yeah, maybe my furnace. They don't think about their water heater, their stove, their gas fireplace, that barbecue they have in their garage. So, without that knowledge of how many potential sources there is, it's not surprising that they don't see the probability being that high. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, they accept very limited responsibility. And unfortunately, the preventative actions, because of all these perceptions, they're skeptical of the value and the qualifications that are required. Now, here's probably the one aha moment. Well, I shouldn't say one, but one of the ones that we had early on in our research. One word can make all the difference. TSSA and a lot of other people used to talk about, regularly maintain your furnace. When you talk to people, they say, I do that. And you go, well, what do you mean you do that? Well, I vacuum around it. I change the filters. So I don't only just do it once a year. I do it 4 times a year. I should be super safe. When you change that word to inspection, their perception changes entirely. For most people, they go, well, how do I know how to inspect it? That doesn't mean they immediately say they're going to get it done, but it changes their perspective very quickly. So, I mean, it sounds like a very small thing, but it's fundamental to people's perception. So when we start talking about regular inspections, they start to be, oh, well, maybe I need to think about that because I can't do that. Now, it isn't that easy because unfortunately they'll go, well, Fred that lives down the street, he's pretty good. He's pretty handy. Maybe he can come and inspect it. It's like, no, that's not it either. Same with alarms, whether they're smoke or CO or combos. They misunderstand, and I'm talking to the people that know this better than we do even, about how people understand the installation, testing, replacement. A lot of people, unfortunately, will look at it and say, I bought an alarm. I'm good to go for the next 25 years. So there's a lot of areas on the preventative action side that we have to continue to work on. Very quickly, we've done a lot of research to see how are people behaving now. And I'm not going to go through all these numbers. It's just to show you this is why we have so much work to do. I mean, in terms of inspections, the numbers are not good. This wasn't a surprise, but we wanted to quantify for ourselves just how big the problem is, and also to help us down the road start to measure how these numbers change. So, if you don't have a baseline, it's hard to tell, are you making a difference? Next one. Okay, a lot of information on this slide. Again, I'm not going to go through it all. It's just, we felt it was important to get, again, the baseline on what are people doing now with CO alarms. And again, you folks are closer to this than we are even. And what we see is obviously we have a lot of work still to do and on all sorts of levels. So again, it was just making sure we have the data to substantiate where Ontarians are so that we'll know when we start to get them to where we need them to be. Okay, so what's this tell us about our target audiences? Well, number one, CO is off their radar screen. Number one, don't get a lot of people sitting around the dinner table talking about carbon monoxide. I can't really blame them, although we'd like them to. That's just not, CO just ain't the topic of the day. We know from our research that the knowledge and risk perceptions among those four segments is very different. And so we know we have a situation that is no one size fits all. We know in most cases there's an coming in attitude of it's not my responsibility. It tells us on consequence messaging. In other words, CO, if it happens, it's very dangerous. It has all sorts of health implications. They're important to remind people of. But here's the key area that we've worked on. That's probability messaging. And so that's really is the kind of primary focus that drives most of what TSSA is doing. Because if we can't change that number in the risk equation, the perception of the risk will remain either at zero or very low, and therefore people won't feel they need to do anything. And that's our problem. Our problem is probability, not so much consequence. So in a nutshell, as I mentioned earlier, we could spend a whole session on just, the behavioral research we've done, but it really boils down to what we call the behavior change continuum. And it starts with awareness. If people aren't even aware of the issue, then, you've got a major job to do. Then you need to get them to understand their role in dealing with that and helping to mitigate the risk. If you can't move through those two parts of the continuum, just trying to jump ahead to tell them what they need to do or get them to do it is much more difficult. So what we learned with CO is a lot of our work is at the first part of this continuum. It doesn't mean we ignore the others. In other words, we do speak to call to action, but that can't be the essential role, because it's like if people are at the start and going, I don't even know about this and I don't think it's a problem, so I stop listening. So it's frustrating when you're dealing with behavior change to some extent, because you want to get to the end, but sometimes it's going to take you a while to push people through this continuum. Now, the beauty of this is that measuring behavior change, as Susie said earlier, is a long-term objective and one that we're all striving for. It's hard to measure on a yearly or even sometimes on a 5 to 7 year basis, but you can measure on a more or less real-time basis if you're increasing awareness. You can measure if you're enhancing understanding. And if you start to get people moving through those two, they will get to improve safety behaviors. So it gives you interim measures, actual outcome measures that you can start to see if you can, move people along there. You're going to get safety, ultimately improve safety behaviors. But if you start a program and expect that you're, at the end of a year or even 2 years, that you're going to see a significant safety behavior change, I'd be skeptical. Not that your finding's wrong, but have they really changed the behavior? It's kind of like raising kids. Or are they just doing it when you're in the room? Well, we want to get to the point where they're doing it when we're not in the room, because it really is a behavior change then. That seldom happens in a very short period of time. However, we've all got financial masters we need to appease. They have to see that their money they're spending is actually creating change. And we've developed metrics and ways of measuring them so we can go into those budget meetings and say, hey, our programs are achieving the absolutely essential steps to behavior change. So be patient, because it's going to take a while, but we can say with confidence that we're on the road to behavior change.
And being on that road to behavior change, ultimately our engagement goals are really about, improving people's awareness and their understanding of the risk when it comes to CO, increasing that likelihood, what we keep talking about, that people will actually take the required actions that they need to take to keep themselves and their loved ones safe, those risk mitigation actions that they should take, which for us is twofold. It's really a defense in depth approach in terms of getting those fuel burning appliances inspected yearly and having and regularly testing the CO alarms in their homes. And ultimately, given that public education is our risk mitigation tool, we really look for the opportunities to leverage and build on any sort of public safety initiatives that are either ongoing or that we put into place, things like branching off on Carbon Monoxide Awareness Week. Each year we take an opportunity. To Dave's point, we all have limited resources when it comes to budgetary and monetary amounts. So appreciating we are a regulatory authority for the province, every year we take a certain portion of the province and push out a public awareness campaign as it relates to CO safety. Just for your information, coming up this fall, we're going to be approaching Windsor, Essex, the Township of Peely, and Renfrew County. Ultimately, the goal, just like our behavior change, ultimately the goal for TSSA is to reach every portion of Ontario, because again, what we've learned through our research findings is when it comes to CO awareness, it's fairly ubiquitous across the province. And as a public regulator for the province, it really is our responsibility to reach all Ontarians, regardless of where they're situated in the province.
Yeah, I should just mention on that one. One of the things that TSSA recognizes is that we're not in this alone. And one of the things that Susie and I are working on as well is that we want to build on this successful platform by having others join together in a safety coalition, so to speak. Now that we I think now that we can say with confidence, we have a strategy that absolutely, you'll see in a few minutes, that absolutely quantitatively works. What we need to do is more of it. And TSSA is never going to have the resources by itself to do that. And it's not just about money. It's about voices. That's why the fire service is so important. You know, there's in rough numbers, like 30,000 fires out there in the province, all with probably the most trusted voice in any community. So it's not just about money. I mean, money's important too, but it's also about engaging partners who can share that message and use what we've spent decades building is a defensible and demonstrably successful strategy for achieving progress on the CO front. And so, you know, you're going to hear more from us and talking to groups like this one and others and saying, how can we work collectively together? Because the one thing we really want to make sure of is that because CO is not an exciting topic, we need to be consistent. We believe in our approach, and it needs to be scientific in a sense. What's the research tell us, and what do the results tell us in terms of how do we engage people? What do we say? How do we say it? And how do we demonstrate that it's having an effect? So I just want to make it clear that, you know, we've demonstrated success, but in order to move that behavior change more quickly is going to take more voices and more resources, and no one organization's going to have enough of that. TSSA's had enough to build the strategy, and we're implementing it to the extent possible. But we're impatient now about the execution side of this, and I mean that in a positive way. So you're going to see us reaching out more in the next year or two to talk to organizations like yours and other ones to say, how can we start to work collectively on this? And in some cases, it may be we want some people to write checks like Enbridge or somebody else that has deeper pockets than either TSSA or fire services, because we know we're both challenged when it comes to dollars and cents. But that doesn't mean we don't have other things, other very powerful things we bring to the table, especially from the fire services side, and the trusted voice that you folks can bring more than anybody else. So expect us to be knocking on your door in the coming months.
Absolutely, or ringing that doorbell. Absolutely, because really when it boils down to it, really what we've learned, again, through, you know, all our insights and our research studies, that community engagement is where it's at. It's the most effective. And especially given that, you know, the bulk of these incidents are happening in people's residences and private homes, we really have to get to the core of where these things are happening, and it's in people's homes. And we have to get into the community and get that message directly to the people and where these situations are happening in their homes. Just to reiterate what Dave was mentioning earlier, you know, it really is that whole issue of the probability. Oh, what's the chance of this happening to me? The likelihood, yeah, far if any. We really have to break that down and help people understand, yeah, no, there is a probability and you need to do something about it. And again, what we've learned through all our studies is, you got to keep repeating the message, right? They say on average it takes anywhere between 5 to 7 times before someone starts to absorb a message. So one of the tactics, for example, that we use in our fall campaign, we call it our multi-element campaign, is just that. So for example, we will use multiple direct mail pieces that we will send to all households over a 2-week period. So they get 4 artwork collateral pieces of CO messaging a few days apart over a 2-week period, again, to keep repeating and reiterating the message, because it takes multiple times in order for people to absorb the message. We then combine it with social media messaging, with paid media messaging, with efforts through the likes of yourselves and fire services. And to Dave's point, that's why we are so appreciative and always look for the opportunity to work very closely with fire services in terms of helping us get our collective messaging out, TSSAs in terms of the fuel burning appliances inspections, and fire services from the angle of the CO alarms, the installing, the testing, and the replacing as required.
Yeah,
So
I should just maybe just mention, just mention here for a sec, Susie.
Sure.
We have done a ton of research on how people, what is their preference for being engaged on not just CO, but on risk and safety information. And, we've gone through all sorts of options, open houses, advertising, social media, on and on and on. And we did this early on. And invariably, especially with CO, but with other topics, the relevancy of when people get the message is critical. Because let's face it, a lot of what we talk to people about is just, you're hearing thousands of messages every day. And so what we found, and I'll be honest, I always am about this part, what kept coming out was, get the information to me in my home. That's where my furnace is. Picking up information somewhere else, it's not, and I don't like to be dismissive of the other platforms, because they're not, it's kind of, I use another statement that probably overuse it. I go with good, better, best. I think most people are really making an effort to do a good program, and they are good. But we realize to move the needle, we've got to get better, and we want to get the best. And what we found invariably, especially with CO, is that engaging people with the information in their homes gives you the best chance that they will actually digest it and potentially start to use it, because that's where it's relevant to them. If we're talking about getting your appliances inspected and they're reading that while they're sitting in their front room, it's a little different than if they're looking at it, I don't know, on a social media post. Again, I'm not saying that those are complementary strategies that are important, but by far, and you'll see it here in this slide that's up on the screen, direct mail campaign. I'm the biggest skeptic of junk mail, which people like to call it. The fancy word is direct mail campaign, but it works. It simply works, and we can prove it. And I think it works for 2 reasons. One, we've been able to develop materials that you're going to see in a minute that are based on research, focus group testing, a lot of work on the messaging, the look, the feel. But equally important was, how do we actually give them to people? And so I'm not excluding anything else, don't get me wrong, but in a way, this was a bonus to us, because direct mail is also one of the cheapest kind of ways to get a lot of information to a lot of people. But, we didn't just sit in a room and decide this on our own. We actually talked to Ontarians, probably, I can say thousands of them, to get their preferences to how to do this, and then also tested the materials. So everything you're going to see is based on both kind of, qualitative and quantitative research and in-field testing and measurement. So we held our feet to the fire to make sure that what we were doing, is based on both our communication experience and expertise over the years, but equally important on what does the audience think of it. So sorry, Susie, I just wanted to put that out there, because it really is fundamental. So what you're going to see now is based on a lot of probably 5 to 7 years of developmental and testing before it ever went kind of big scale.
Yeah. No, thanks for that, Dave. And the upcoming slides that we're going to be leafing through in the next couple of minutes really demonstrate the various tactics that we continue to take when it comes to our community engagement and our campaigns. Starting off with the direct mail, an example is the seasonal booklets that we put together. Here are two examples of our Autumn Watch and Winter Wise. And essentially what we learned in our research studies as well is, to Dave's much earlier point, that, at the end of the day, CO safety is not your typical household table talk kind of thing. And, it's not a top of mind topic, and it's not, pardon the expression, it's not a sexy topic. So what we found is when we were putting together our booklet over the years, we revised it to the point that we put other seasonally relevant topics in there unrelated to CO. So take, for example, winter wise, we would throw in skating and tobogganing and winter driving safety, as well as obviously other important CO messages. Because what we found is the likelihood, if someone's going to read potentially an article on tobogganing because that's what interests them, there would be a greater likelihood that they're now going to read your topic or your article on CO safety. So that was quite insightful as we originally started off with our booklets and where we've gotten to present day with our booklets. Relevancy is really, really important. The community blitzes, like I mentioned, we've got one coming up shortly, kicking off on November 1st. Pretty much is a 2-week campaign. We use the hook of Carbon Monoxide Safety Awareness Week, which starts November 1st. So we typically run from 12 to 14 days, anywhere between November 1st through to the 14th day of November. 2-week blitz. Literally, as I mentioned, multi-elements. We use tactics such as delivering household pieces, branded materials to all the households in our campaign area. And you'll see what those elements are in a couple of slides coming up. As mentioned earlier, we use opportunities like earned media to get the messaging out there in local newspapers, online papers, print papers, etc., billboards whenever possible. If necessary, social media, a really, really important part as we continue to talk about really this whole stakeholder involvement and participation, particularly as it comes to and thanks to fire services, and then ultimately measuring our campaigns. Were they effective? Are they aware? Do they recall? Is the probability greater now that they're actually going to take some actions to keep themselves safe and their loved ones safe? So it's quite, like I said, quite a multi-element approach that we take.
Sorry, Susie,
of course, Dave.
If you just take a pause.
Sure.
There are two things I just want to throw out here, because I know we're gonna, we have an hour and we've got about 15 minutes left, so we're gonna go through some stuff pretty quickly here. What I wanted to say is that, Susie and I are absolutely available for collectively, your association, or individually for various departments. If there's a particular part of this presentation, whether it's the research, whether it's the messages, whether it's these campaigns, because we could spend a lot of time giving you the background about how these campaigns were designed. And just give you one quick instance. You might say, well, why 12 to 14 days? Well, we did a lot of work on varying the time, the delivery schedule, the type of materials, when they go out, and we measured all of our campaigns pre and post. This was in our testing phases. So there's a lot of information behind why what you're seeing now is the hard-baked recipe. This works. If we don't fool around with it, we know if we do it this way, we can almost predict within a few percentage points what we're going to achieve. That wasn't always the case, but we did a lot of work behind this. And a lot of that work could be beneficial for you for other programs, whether it's, cooking safety, whether it's escape plans, whether it's whatever, because it has some generic quality to it. We just don't have the time today to present this. But I just wanted to make sure you're aware that, we have no secrets. TSSA is a not-for-profit safety organization. We don't make any money off any of this stuff. So we're willing to share any and all of the findings and whatever level of detail you might find useful. And we knew today we're throwing a lot of stuff at you. So please keep in mind that this is the beginning of the discussion, not the end. So I can just kind of put myself in your position and go, wow, this is a lot to kind of take in all in one big kind of Thanksgiving meal here. So keep that in mind that any part of this, we'll be happy to continue the discussion, as I said, either with individual departments, individual people, or with your group as a whole. So, that offer's on the table.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I can't stress that enough. Thanks so much for that, Dave. Absolutely, 1000% to exactly everything that Dave just said. As I mentioned, not wanting to eat up time, because we also want to give you the opportunity, if you have any questions you want to throw out at us. The next couple of slides just show the elements that we send out to the households as part of that direct mail campaign, everything from a notepad to, the info card, reinforcing, as Dave was mentioned earlier, there's this misconception that it's just the furnace. Well, it's not, and really stressing that on average in Ontario homes, you could have anywhere between 4 to 6 fuel burning appliances, all of which should be regularly inspected.
Yeah, we know, sorry, Susan, I'm jumping in again, but we know that as awareness of the number of potential sources increases, people's perception of the probability of the risk changes dramatically. And that, as you know, the probability barrier is our biggest issue. So by getting people to start thinking about, oh, wait a minute, there's more here than I thought. Well, maybe there is a chance this could happen. Like, you need to get those kind of pauses in people's brains to go, oh, well, wait a minute. And if you can get that, now the boot camps happen. You started to break down that overestimate of knowledge, and then they go, maybe I better start looking at this stuff. I mean, there's still a number of steps for them to go, but boy, you cracked that first important knowledge or probably false knowledge barrier. So yeah, Susie's absolutely right. You got to find ways to get people to question what they believe they already know.
And just another 2 elements, an inspections tip card that guides people through the process of how going about, obtaining an inspection for their appliances. And again, reinforcing that critical element from both our perspectives, that you do need both. It really is that defense in depth approach that we spoke about earlier, having that inspection and having that alarm.
Yeah, this is a really important one. We actually developed this the very first time with Kingston Fire Services, where we did a joint kind of trial blitz program with them. And we found it very effective, and so did Kingston Fire. I mean, and basically it was, there's no silver bullet here. It's not that if you get an inspection, you're 100% good to go. And it's not if you have an alarm, you're 100% good to go, because stuff happens. And what people don't understand, and I know, again, I'm speaking to a very knowledgeable audience, but we often have to remind people that alarms don't prevent incidents. What they do is mitigate the consequences. So they're not about the probability part. They're about the consequence, which is hugely important, because if you get an inspection, something could still happen the next day where you get an incident. So you still need to protect yourself in terms of that consequence. So it's, you often get people saying, well, I got an alarm, so that would prevent anything from ever happening. No, what it'll do is, in the unfortunate circumstance where something does happen, it'll tell you to get the hell out, just like fire. So it's a consequence mitigator, not a probability mitigator. I mean, that all sounds very complicated and academic, but it really is important, because people are looking, I mean, this is probably me, people are looking for the easy way out. Can I do one thing? Number one, no. And number two, even if you did one thing, you got to do it right. So, it's just, unfortunately, as human beings, we tend to take the easiest way out. So what we can see by this piece is, okay, yeah, you need both of them. It's not that easy. So it really worked really, really well. So we also use this with Kitchener Utilities quite often.
Mm-hmm.
So it's anyway, again, I'm going on and on here. We could go into each one of these pieces and talk about them from a similar perspective about why they look how they do and why we do what we do with them. Sorry, Susie, I'm
by all means. No, that's great.
Once I get on a rant, it's hard to stop.
No, it's all fantastic stuff.
Like Rick Mercer on this thing, I just need some weird stuff behind me.
And this one just demonstrates in working in partnership with fire services, these outdoor kind of vinyl banners that we've been providing to fire services, again, reinforcing our 2 key messages, and they've been putting them in and around their stations.
But you can see with these, again, there's a science behind the color, the words, and the use of language in general. And it's also a branding exercise. We keep each piece is part of that multiple message. So people start saying, wait a minute, I think I saw something like this, a couple of days ago. we just have to break through that apathy about and that overwhelming messaging that we all get every day. So, branding becomes very important, but then you got to make sure the brand is actually effective, that somehow it grabs people. So we've done the testing on these materials to make sure that they're designed in a way that have the best chance to actually, rise to the top of the pile of stuff we all see every day.
And exactly to Dave's point, with that consistency in the brand, that hoping, as I mentioned earlier, there is that association that people start to make. It's like, oh, well, I got a piece 2 days ago and I got a piece 2 days before that. So that hopefully that repetitive messaging as it comes through in the various tactics and forums actually hopefully starts to sink in with people.
Well, and the method to our madness is they get the notepad first because people keep them. And, we're realistic. We know they're not going to read the messages on it every day or whatever. The important thing is when the next one comes, they go, oh, this kind of looks like that notepad. Maybe I'll read it. So it's just basic social marketing.
And again, just another example of the paid media advertisements that we've taken out in papers, local papers, community papers, etc. Again, reinforcing our two key messages. Billboards that we've used in the past in and around communities.
Yeah, we don't always use all of these tactics because one, we don't always have the money, and second, depending on the community, some of them are more effective than others. But we just wanted to give you an image of what's in our toolbox.
And while we know that direct mail is the route to go, and that's why we continue to go based on all the research that we do, we also recognize that in today's society, social media is picking up as well too. So we take the opportunity through various platforms to communicate our message that way. And also, again, working in partnerships with local fire services so that we can share messages, customize as they or we see fit, and be able to, again, just further out the messages with any opportunity that we can through any outlet or forum or platform.
Yeah, I just noticed, I guess we'll have to keep on with our friend Elon Musk and go to X instead of Twitter.
Oh, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah, I'll have to switch that up. Still trying to get used to that one, truth be told, guys. And then our dedicated site, cosafety.ca, which is purely and only about CO safety in terms of resources, in terms of what you need to know when it comes to CO. And a particular page, we have a resource page, if you will, with specific downloads of the campaign materials, whether it's the booklets, whether it's the direct mail pieces, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and all this is available. I mean, like
Absolutely.
I said, TSSA doesn't have at no cost. I mean, we can't print all materials all the time for everyone. Wish we could, but we can't. But we're willing to share anything and everything. So if you have a certain piece, and even if you want to talk about the artwork and how it might be modified, we're always up to co-branding, with logos from various fire departments. So feel free if there's something you're really interested in, again, to contact Susie or her team, and we can talk about how it might be able to be adapted a little bit so it even got more of a local flavor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And now, as we're coming to a close, just a few last slides in terms of campaign assessment. As we had mentioned earlier, we use a third-party independent research firm to really measure our campaigns. And we kind of look at three key metrics. So basically, has there been changes in people's awareness? Do they recall the campaign? Are they better? Do they have a better understanding now of CO before the campaign and then after the campaign? And ultimately, really about user behavior. Is there an intention to do something different at the end of the day? And that something different, hopefully, is taking one of the two, both actions when it comes to staying safe, the inspections and having the alarms.
So I should mention just very quickly, we spent a lot of time figuring out how to measure the impact of these campaigns. As I said a little earlier, it's not easy. But we found a way to be able to measure it, because you can't just ask somebody, do you remember this? And they say yes or no. And not to be mean again, but believe, because people don't like to admit sometimes they haven't. So we've had to find unique way to develop questions where we're much more confident that what we're hearing is the whole truth and nothing but the truth, not people just giving us the answer they think that they should. So there's quite a art and science to how we've been able to make sure when we ask people questions about are they going to do something different, and if they say yes, we don't just let them off the hook. Like we want to know, okay, you're saying that because you think you should say that, but what is it you're going to do? And why are you going to do that? Because then it starts to give you an insight as to whether or not they've actually thought about this. So we haven't just accepted the simple answers to direct questions, because people are people, and you know, you got to use a kind of a psychological approach with this. So again, we have a lot of expertise in that area, working with third-party research firms that we can also share if you're trying to find ways. And sometimes the resources aren't there to do it quite to the level that TSSA has done. Even TSSA has scaled back because we're now at a point where we don't have to ask as many questions, and we know how to ask them. And again, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. We've already spent, the TSSA spent the money and the time. So, you know, use us and abuse us when it comes to that kind of stuff. We can probably help you develop things if you're interested in trying to, you know, start to dig a little deeper into how effective is our campaign, and not just on CO, but in general, because these things apply to any kind of public ed campaign or strategy.
And these next couple of slides really speak to, you know, what is the research telling us? So for example, when it comes to recall rates, when we look at an industry average of any kind of direct mail campaign, you're looking at about a good recall is anywhere between a 2 and a 3%. As you can tell, the slide speaks for itself when it came to our campaign elements, whether it was our booklets, whether it was our direct mail. As you can see, the numbers very much speak for themselves.
Well, and you can see, probably most importantly on this is the trend line, red line. You know, we started with this with very early days, and we learned and we learned and we changed and we evolved, and we're able to chart the fact that what we learned from our research and from our in-field experience is showing a progressive upward trend in the recall rate. Now, I'll be honest, we probably just about maxed out, because you're only going to get so high. But that's why I say when we run a campaign now, pretty much we can predict where it's going to be. We still track it, but it used to be our post campaign was research and tracking. It's mostly just tracking now, because, you know, after 15 years, you know, we want to use our money for other things, and it's expensive to do measurements. So, as I say, the most important thing here is you can see how we progressed, how we evolved in our understanding of the challenge, and how we were able to increase basically what we're achieving.
And just to Dave's point about progression, the same held true for when it came to sources. In the early days, it was all about the furnace. And as we started to tweak our campaigns and our messages and reinforcing that, you know, it's more than just the furnace, we started to see the numbers shift with the other appliances. And this obviously goes to show that, okay, they're getting it. They're getting that it's more than just the furnace. So that too was a real enlightening thing, and, you know, kind of a feather in our cap as we started to see that progression as well too.
We know this is a key indicator. Because we know that knowledge of more than one appliance changes the view of probability. So getting numbers like you know, the water heater going from 38, basically almost doubling, is critical to us, because we know in the long term, as they start to understand that's a potential source, there's a much greater likelihood they'll say, maybe we need to get something done. Even if they don't get it inspected, but they get the furnace inspected, it's a step in the right direction. So these numbers were critical to us, and still are, that we continue to build and maintain this kind of level. Because if you stop, we know that the basic default position is these numbers will start to go down.
And last but not least, also seeing in terms of people's awareness levels, right? And really starting to see an increase into the buckets of people are somewhat informed, very informed when it comes to CO safety in their homes. So shifting out of the very informed or somewhat uninformed and moving into the more positive spectrums of somewhat more informed or very informed when it comes to CO safety in their home. So again, that progression from, you know, the more positive, whether it's on action, whether it's on thinking, whether it's on intent. So again, a very positive sign for us. So in the end, what did we learn? basically, on average, 20 to 30% of residents who recall the campaigns say, as I was mentioning, they're now more somewhat informed when it comes to adopting new behaviors, changing the way they're thinking of doing things. And when asked the question, what, if anything, would you do differently now that you're a little bit more informed? It was great to see. It's our two key messages. It really boiled down to getting their fuel burning appliances inspected and the whole concept and component of CO alarms, having them, regularly testing them, and replacing when and as required.
Yeah, that's really an important point, I think, just to kind of end on, is that it's all about outcomes. And, you know, we've moved away from activity measures. So it's not just about, well, we gave out, you know, 500,000 booklets or went to 500,000 households. I mean, it's not that that's unimportant, but it's like, okay, but did they read it? Did they internalize it? Did it change their perceptions of you know, CO as a risk? And did it actually induce them to be more likely to do something? And if so, what? So, you know, we believe it's important to measure right through there to get to the outcome, because ultimately that's what we want to achieve. Understanding, though, that each one of those intermediary steps are also important. You can see we've taken it right to the end level. Our next step, obviously, is over time, we want to see, you know, not just TSSAs, but the province's overall not just incidents, because it's not just about the incident, it's about the severity, because that's where, you know, you get into consequence management and things like alarms, because yes, you want to see the incidents go down, but you also want the number of high consequence incidents go down. So both those things we're aiming for kind of on the decade level timeline. On the other ones, we're looking at, you know, 4 or 5 years. We want to see, just like we saw in those sources, we want to see them start moving in the right direction. We want to see the trend lines going the right way. And that's what we're seeing. So that's a lot.
So we know we've thrown out a lot, and
we probably used up most of the hour.
Exactly. But to Dave's point, if there are any questions you want to throw out us now, or at any point in time you want to re-engage us on something particularly in the deck or something unassociated with the deck, feel free to reach out. We're, like Dave said, we are more than happy to work together, to engage, because we really see this as an incredible partnership, as it has been opportunity and as it will continue to be. So I'll open up the floor if anyone has any questions or thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Susie and Dave. I don't see anything in the chat, but we'll give people maybe a couple of minutes there. But thank you so much. That was really, really informative. And you can see that the research is paying off, and a lot of the information that you shared, although specific to CO, I think is definitely a crossover to what a lot of us do with smoke alarms and our home safe home programs and that kind of stuff as well. So I think it's definitely useful data. There's been a lot of work that you've put into it, but it's good to see that information come forward for us today. So thank you for sharing that and for making yourselves available as well for the group to reach out if they have some questions.
Well, I hope it's more of a promise than a threat. As a semi-retired guy, I got time on my hands, so if we can be of benefit to you. Susie's group's a pretty busy bunch. They've got other things they have to do as well, although this is their dominant activity. But, you know, I was joking earlier saying we'll be ringing doorbell. Back when I was at TSSA, I spent a lot of time, obviously, on the Safety Council, but also I can recall I gave presentations, I think, to your association, like this is it may be before any of your time. You know, if there's things like that you think can help, or even more specific, I know we call this a workshop, but if there's more specific things, let's talk about them, because we really want to share this, because we know if this gets done even more and more, and your point is absolutely dead on. A lot of the research we did, and even the measurement stuff that we've done, you know, we know people don't think in nice little categories like you know, we're responsible for CO and somebody else is responsible for safety you know, fire. To the public, these things overlap and their attitudes towards them overlap. So when we did a lot of this, we asked not just about CO alarms, we asked about smoke alarms, You know, smoke alarms, CO alarms, how often do you check them? What do you do with them? So we got scads of data on that. I mean, literally decades worth. And we're happy to talk about what we learned about it. I mean, we only went so far with a lot of it because we do have to stick to our own jurisdictions to some extent. But as Susie mentioned, though, in our seasonal safety booklets, I mean, we had, and then I'll shut up, but we had an interesting discussion when I was at TSSA, when I was directing the programs about people. I got a lot of flack internally saying, why are we talking about snowmobiles? TSSA has nothing to do with snowmobiles. And I said, think of it like a grocery store. You know, why do they put milk at the back? You know, so put our stuff in. But if you get people in your store because you have chocolate bars, you know, the can of beans isn't very exciting, but eventually they might walk by it and buy it. So, I mean, it's the same thing with safety information. Sometimes you have to just, you know, broaden your message so that you can get your reader to engage at all. But I got a lot of strange looks, but the proof is in the pudding. And we can prove that doing some of these things and being a little bit more open-minded. And it's not to you guys, because you guys are all educators, you get it. But sometimes I know you have the same battles we had. You got to take this, you know, either to the chief, and the chief's got to take it with the budget, the council, or wherever. And there needs to be, you know, an argument, a business case to be made. So we can help in the background with some of that stuff as well. So we're all in this together. So if we can help, we fought the same battles that you fight on many fronts, just to, I don't want to say, you know, to make sure we can defend our existence. But sometimes it's almost like that. We get it. We get the struggles when it comes to budget time or just any time. So anyway, I'll shut up. But, you know, there's lots to share here.
That's okay. No worries. Thank you. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anyone has anything afterwards, you can bring it forward to the OAFE and we're happy, or directly to Dave and Susie, and we'll get an answer for you.
That'd be great.
Yeah, awesome. Shannon did put in the chat there the feedback form, so if we can get all of you to complete that feedback form for us, so we can share those results with Susie and Dave, as well as direct future messaging. And we also have holiday safety seminar with Laura King coming up on November 1st. So if you have not registered for that, please do so. And I think that's it for today. Thank you, Susie and Dave, again for joining us, and thank you everyone for coming today.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Exactly. Yep. Thank you so much, guys. Talk soon.
Yep. Take care.
Bye-bye.